Hey, you want proof that Frank Turek is a dishonest idiot? You'll get all you could wish for coming up next. You know, I'm actually enjoying making Frank Turek look like an imbecile, or at the very least, pointing out where he spends the majority of his time making himself look stupid. So I'm going to do a couple of his question and answer sessions from his very own YouTube channel, where he makes himself look ridiculous and doesn't even recognize how bad he makes himself look. This time out, we've got a question about morality from a debate he had with Michael Shermer. Let's take a look.
We have a question now for Dr. Frank Turek.
Yes. Your criticism of science is that there is no materialistic explanation of morality. But theism makes the truth claim of knowing right from wrong. Is it not then the theistic burden of proof to tell us which religion is true and which are false? To be a theist is to be atheist to all gods but your own.
Yeah, that's a good point, and one I'm sure that Frank won't have a good answer for, because he never does. So let's watch.
I don't know if that's a question. What's the question?
The question is it not your burden of proof to tell us which religions are true and which are false?
What? Weren't you listening, Frank? Or are you just stalling for time?
Well, yeah, I think that's wise to try and figure out which worldview is true and which isn't. Michael thinks his materialistic worldview is true. I don't think it is. I think he can't even justify morality. He can't justify reason. He can't even justify the ability to do science. Again, because if we're molecules in motion, none of those things actually exist, or we couldn't do science if we're just molecular machines.
And Frank is avoiding answering the question because he has no good answer. So I'll help him look like less of an incompetent idiot and answer for him in a way he isn't honest enough to do. Because the reality is, it is the theist's job to show that their religion, and I would assume that they think their own religion is the true one, is actually true. That their moral views are actually valid. But as we see here, Frank is just dancing around the question because I think he knows that he's got nothing worthwhile to say. Science says nothing about morality. It never has, and it never will. But religion pretends that it's got all of those difficult moral questions answered. But as I keep asking, how do they know? Where did they get those ideas? And how did they objectively test them to see if they were true? And the answer is, as Frank knows and is desperately trying not to say, is that they don't. They are just emotionally comforting claims presented as fact when they're nothing of the sort.
I think, yes, you ought to give evidence for your worldview. That's what I try and do through books.
No, you wouldn't know evidence if it bit you. If you had any, you could have just answered the question instead of hemming and hawing and pretending like you have anything worthwhile to say. Instead, you're just waving your arms around looking like an idiot.
And the Bible actually tells us to do that.
The Bible is a book of claims, not a book of evidence. It doesn't matter what the Bible says until you can prove that the Bible is worthwhile enough to pay attention to in the first place. When are you going to do that, Frank? When are you going to do anything but look stupid?
The Bible actually says, always be ready to give an answer. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. The prophet Isaiah says, come let us reason together. Paul says, I'm set in defense of the gospel. Paul also says, let's destroy arguments and take every thought captive to Christ.
And when exactly are you going to prove that anything that comes out of the Bible is true? When are you going to show that Christianity is actually worthwhile when compared to other religions? Or to anything for that matter? Because I think we all know you've got nothing. You're just dancing for the camera and hoping nobody notices.
Contrary to what most people think, Christianity is a worldview built on reason. You get evidence that it's true, and then you trust in the object of that evidence. Christianity is not blind faith. Atheism's blind faith.
And exactly where is that evidence again? You seem to have neglected presenting it. Instead, it's just a dog and pony show of Frank Turek acting like a moron and pretending that he has anything worth believing. This wasn't the question. This was performance art, and I can't help looking at Frank Turek and seeing him squirm in his seat, even if it is subconscious. I think he's really uncomfortable that anyone asked this question and expected him to come up with an answer, because nothing he said had anything at all to do with the question being asked. He's just rationalizing his way around the question because he clearly doesn't have an answer. Anyone surprised? Anyone? And of course, no one is, and no one should be. This is why I think that the biggest names in religious apologetics actually perform the worst when thrust under the microscope. His performance here is so uniformly awful, yet he puts it on his own YouTube channel like he's somehow proud that he dodged a bullet, and everybody else ought to be impressed. Are you impressed? I know I'm not. This is just terrible, terrible theater performed by a guy who is completely impressed with himself, and he shouldn't be. Because it's really hard to imagine him doing worse than what we just saw, except maybe if his head exploded and he just ran around the stage bumping into things. This is what religious apologists look like. This is how horrible they are. Frank Turek is a laughable idiot. And I think somewhere deep down inside, whether he's willing to admit it or not, he knows he's a laughable idiot. He knows that what he's spewing is nonsense, but he expects the mindless flock to lap it up, and that's why he spends so much time appealing to the theologically clueless. Anybody surprised? I didn't think so.